Hey everyone, I'm your author June. Before we get started, I really would appreciate it if everyone could hit the subscribe button. It helps me grow the channel, and I would love for all of you to come on this journey with me, as a family. Now, let's get into the story. Let me know if you enjoy. The hemp chafed Colt's neck, a brutal reminder of his impending demise. The dawn air, biting and brisk, carried the reek of pine mingled with the acrid tang of dread his, and surely that of the assembled townsfolk. He stared at the lightening horizon, a pale watercolor wash against the dark canvas of night. He wouldn't afford them the spectacle of his fear, least of all, her, though she likely wasn't present. Josephine Blake was justice incarnate, and the court had ruled. He was condemned. The hangman, a thick-set fellow whose gaze skittered away from Colt's, tweaked the noose. Colt squeezed his eyes shut, summoning the desert, the scorching earth underfoot, the gritty taste of freedom. Those were the sensations he'd mourn. Not the iron bars, not the sneers, but the boundless sky. A low murmur rippled through the crowd, a restless shuffle of boots. Then, a voice, sharp and distinct, cleaved the air. Halt! Colt's lids snapped back. Josephine Blake stood at the gallows base, her face ashen, yet resolute. She raised a hand, silencing the onlookers. Beside her, Judge Samuel Blake, her father, wore an expression of thunderous disbelief. "Father, I must be heard," Josephine declared, her voice unwavering despite the tremor in her hand. "Before this sentence is executed," Judge Blake advanced, his tone a low growl. "Josephine, this is inappropriate. This man is a convicted felon. The law demands satisfaction." "Satisfaction?" Josephine's voice fractured with emotion. "Is it satisfaction to execute a man while my sister remains missing? Time is a luxury we don't have." A collective gasp swept over the crowd. Lily Blake's vanishing act had gripped the town for weeks. "What are you implying?" Judge Blake demanded, his face darkening with each word. "I'm suggesting that Colt Avery might be our only avenue to Lily's rescue," she stated, her gaze locking with her father's. "He knows these lands intimately. He understands the men who inhabit them. He possesses the skills to find her." Judge Blake's face hardened into a rigid mask of fury. "You'd parley with a serpent to reclaim Lily. He's a menace. And Lily's imperiled now, Father," Josephine retorted, her voice amplified. "The law has failed her so far. I won't permit it to fail her again." She swiveled towards the sheriff. "Release him." The sheriff hesitated, his eyes flicking towards Judge Blake, who stood like a granite statue. Josephine held the sheriff's gaze. "Do it," she commanded, her tone brooking no dissent. With visible relief, the hangman began to slacken the rope. Colt felt the pressure ease from his windpipe. He scrutinized Josephine, trying to decipher the purpose behind her actions. To risk everything her standing, her father's approval for her sister, and to entrust him, a condemned man. The chains unlocked. Colt, still unsteady, descended from the platform. A wave of whispers followed him, eyes filled with a mixture of apprehension and morbid fascination. Escorted back to his cell, the iron door reverberated shut behind him. He slumped onto the cot, the straw rustling like secrets beneath him. He'd been suspended over the abyss, and now what? A commutation. He harbored suspicion. He mistrusted her. Later, Josephine entered his cell, a lantern held high, painting elongated shadows across the stone. Her eyes, usually alight with purpose, were burdened with worry. "Colt Avery," she began, her voice hushed. I come bearing a proposition." He remained mute, observing her. He wouldn't offer her assistance. "I believe you can locate my sister," she pressed. "I know you're familiar with this territory. I know you possess certain aptitudes. Aptitudes that landed me on that scaffold," Colt rasped. "Aptitudes that could rescue Lily," she countered, unwavering. "Aid me in her discovery, and I'll exhaust every avenue to secure your exoneration. I will sway my father to grant you clemency." Colt scrutinized her face, seeking any glint of deceit. Only desperation stared back, accompanied by a faint flicker of hope. A potent cocktail. "And should I decline?" he inquired, already anticipating the reply. "Then you will suffer the full weight of your transgressions," she stated, her tone turning severe. "However, I refuse to accept that you're the monster they portray, Colt Avery. I suspect there's a more complex story to you than just an outlaw." He scoffed. "You barely know me. I know that your eyes were trained away from the mob this morning," she remarked, her gaze locking with his. "You shielded them from your fear. That speaks volumes. It speaks of pride. And perhaps, just perhaps, a conscience." Colt averted his gaze, unable to meet her probing stare. He had spent so long perfecting a mask of indifference that he'd almost forgotten the discomfort of being truly seen. "What makes you so certain I can find her?" he inquired, his voice roughened. "I'm not certain," she conceded. "But I must attempt it. Lily is family. I'd wade through hell to bring her home." He understood that depth of feeling, that fierce devotion. He had known it for his own kin, before they were lost. "What were the circumstances?" he probed. "She was abducted from her room. No forced entry, no witnesses." Josephine's voice wobbled. "It's as if she simply dissolved into the air." Colt weighed her proposition. Liberty was a potent enticement, but liberty bought with her felt like a different cage. "What's your father's stance on all of this?" "He considers me a simpleton," Josephine responded, a sardonic smile gracing her lips. "He places his faith in the legal system. He trusts in due process." "And you?" "I believe in right," she declared, her voice resonating with conviction. "And sometimes, right lies beyond the confines of legality." Colt knew that better than most. The scales of justice had never tipped in his favor. "What's the hitch?" he questioned. "There's invariably a hitch." "The hitch is," Josephine said, stepping closer, her voice a mere breath, "that I'm partnering with you." Colt stared at her in utter amazement. "You're deranged." "Perhaps," she agreed. "But I won't permit you to gallop off into oblivion, never to be seen again. I require assurance that you're exerting every possible effort to recover Lily." He pictured her, a woman of delicate sensibilities, exposed to the brutal wilderness, confronting perils she couldn't imagine. A death warrant. For both of them. "You wouldn't last a day," he observed. "Then it falls to you to safeguard me," she countered, her chin lifting defiantly. "Wouldn't it?" Colt scrutinized her eyes, seeing not only desperation, but a fierce determination that mirrored his own. He knew this was madness. He knew it was likely a one-way trip. But he also knew that he couldn't abandon her to this fate. And maybe, just maybe, this was his chance. A chance to demonstrate that he was more than a labeled criminal. A chance to seek redemption, not for the courts, but for her. He drew a deep breath. "All right, Blake," he conceded, his voice low. I'll assist you in retrieving your sister. But you must heed my guidance. You must adhere to my instructions precisely. No questions, no objections. Can you manage that?" Josephine nodded, her eyes shimmering with relief. "Yes," she affirmed. "I can." Colt knew he was dealing with the devil. But gazing at Josephine, he couldn't help but entertain the notion that maybe, just maybe, the devil had finally delivered something worth fighting for. He rose to his feet, the chains that had shackled him now discarded relics on the floor. "Then let's bring your sister home." Dust devils pirouetted across the baked earth as they rode out, crimson wheels still circling Colt's wrists, souvenirs of the chains. His focus remained glued to the distant saw-toothed horizon, a stark vista that mirrored the uneasy pact forged in their wake. He felt the weight of Judge Blake's unseen censure, a silent reprimand echoing the accusations he'd long tried to suppress. Beside him, Josephine sat stiffly, her jaw a rigid line, her gaze reflecting a flinty resolve incongruous with her youth and sheltered upbringing. The receding town dissolved into a landscape of thorny scrub and implacable stone. The air, pungent with sage and sun-scorched soil, offered scant solace. This was a land that demanded respect, a land ready to crush the unwary. "You're not obliged to do this," Colt rasped, the words unfamiliar on his tongue. "There's still time to turn back. Let the courts deal with it." Josephine dismissed his suggestion with a sharp, derisive sound. "The courts? My father's jurisdiction? The very same structure about to condemn an innocent man?" She didn't shift her gaze from the snaking trail ahead. "The law failed, Lily. It offers no recourse." Colt grunted, skeptical. He understood the machinations of the law, the ways it could be contorted to serve specific agendas. He also knew that defying it, even for righteous reasons, always carried a steep penalty. "You really think I'm your best bet?" he finally inquired, eyes narrowed. "A convicted felon?" She finally turned, her expression an enigma. "You possess intimate knowledge of this terrain. You understand the denizens lurking in the shadows. And," she paused, her voice softening, "you were willing to gamble everything. Or so it seemed." He understood. She perceived him as a tool, an instrument to be used and then discarded. He couldn't quite fathom why it smarted. He'd been manipulated before. "And what becomes of me once we locate your sister?" he asked, the question weighty between them. "Do I simply vanish into the sunset? Or does Judge Blake demand his pound of flesh?" "My father pledged his word," she responded firmly. "If you assist me in finding Lily, he will grant you a full pardon." Colt emitted a mirthless chuckle. "Your father's word? That's all I'm afforded? I've witnessed men perish for less flimsy assurances." He halted his horse, compelling her to do likewise. He scrutinized her, truly saw her, the fear lurking beneath the unwavering determination, the vulnerability she struggled to mask. "You're engaged in a perilous undertaking, Miss Blake. You believe you comprehend the stakes, but you don't. This is no game played in a drawing room. This is raw reality, where promises are cheaper than a counterfeit coin." "Then what do you require, Avery?" she challenged, her voice betraying a tremor. "What will secure your allegiance?" He hesitated, the query catching him off guard. Loyalty was an unaffordable indulgence, a weakness he couldn't permit. Yet something in her eyes, a spark of hope refusing to be extinguished, prompted a prom. Reconsideration. "Just recover Lily," he said finally, his tone subdued. "Just return her unharmed. That will suffice as recompense." They continued in silence for a long span after that, the tension palpable as the sweltering afternoon heat. The terrain grew increasingly stark, the scrub giving way to naked rock and towering buttes that seemed to belittle their existence. The sun blazed with brutal intensity, scorching the earth and turning the atmosphere into a shimmering mirage. "What was the charge against you?" Josephine ventured, her voice barely audible. Colt tensed. He should have anticipated her inquiry. He'd hoped to keep his history buried, to outpace the specters that pursued him. Yet here, in this pitiless wilderness, there was nowhere to conceal himself. "It's irrelevant," he replied, his tone detached. "It's behind me." "It's relevant to me," she persisted. "I need to understand whom I'm entrusting with my sister's well-being." He sighed, the sound imbued with resignation. "I stood accused of robbery and homicide." Josephine gasped, her hand instinctively covering her mouth. He observed her, bracing for the judgment, the condemnation he expected. It was invariably the same. "Did you commit those acts?" she asked, barely whispering the words. He averted his gaze, unable to sustain her scrutiny. The truth was an intricate web of circumstance and desperation, of faithfulness and deception. It was a narrative he preferred to keep buried, a burden he didn't want to share. "What I did is immaterial," he stated. "What matters is my presence here, assisting you in finding your sister." "But it is not immaterial," she insisted. "It's relevant to me. I require assurance that I can place my faith in you." He turned back, his eyes hard as flint. "Trust is a dangerous commodity, Miss Blake, particularly in this world. You'd be better served relying on your own instincts." "That's untrue," she asserted, her voice ringing with conviction. "We all require someone to trust, someone to believe in." He snorted derisively. "You're an idealist, Miss Blake. This world will soon disabuse you of that notion." He spurred his mount onward, leaving her to play catch-up. He didn't want her trust. He didn't warrant it. His only desire was to locate Lily Blake, to satisfy his part of the agreement, and to fade back into the shadows where he belonged. Yet even as he rode, he couldn't dispel the sensation that Josephine Blake had already stirred something dormant inside him, had awakened a part of himself he thought long extinguished. And that, he realized, was the greatest danger of all. The sun descended below the horizon, daubing the heavens in shades of fiery orange and regal purple. They established camp in a narrow canyon, shielded from the relentless wind. Colt kindled a fire, the flickering flames throwing dancing shadows against the canyon walls. Josephine sat a short distance away, observing him, her expression pensive. "Why did you intervene to save me?" he asked, the question lingering in the cool air. She looked up, surprised by the sudden question. "I articulated my reasons." "I require your assistance." "There were alternative avenues," he countered. "You could have engaged someone else. Someone untainted." She shook her head. "I maintain that you're the only one capable of finding her." He remained unconvinced. There was something more, something she held back. "Why?" he pressed. "Why choose me?" She hesitated, her gaze falling to the ground. "Because," she murmured, "I discerned something in your eyes. Something lost. And I cling to the belief that even the most irredeemable soul can be saved." He scoffed. "Redemption? That's a fanciful tale, Miss Blake. It simply doesn't exist." "I refuse to accept that," she declared, her voice unwavering. "I believe everyone warrants a second chance." He gazed at her, recognizing the steadfast conviction in her eyes. It was a naive belief, a perilous belief. yet it was also beautiful. "You're mistaken," he conceded, his tone subdued, "but I commend your optimism." They remained in silence for a while longer, punctuated only by the crackling of the fire. The stars began to emerge, glittering like scattered diamonds against the vast canvas of the night sky. It was a breathtaking spectacle, a reminder of the immensity and enigma of the universe. Yet Colt was unable to savor it. He was too deeply immersed in his own darkness, too haunted by the ghosts of his past. "Describe Lily to me," he said finally, breaking the quiet stillness. "What was she like?" Josephine's face softened with a wistful smile. "She was everything I am not. She possessed kindness, compassion, a zest for life. She perceived the good in everyone, even those who didn't deserve it." Her smile faltered. "She was my dearest companion." Colt nodded, understanding. He comprehended the pain of losing a loved one, of having a void ripped into your heart that could never be mended. "We will find her," he avowed, his voice resolute. "I pledge to you, we will. Bring her home." Josephine regarded him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered softly. "Thank you for instilling hope." He looked away, uneasy with her appreciation. He didn't merit it. He was merely an outlaw, a condemned man. He didn't deserve her hope, her trust, or her kindness. Yet even as he repeated this to himself, he knew that something had shifted. He was no longer solely an outlaw. He was something more complex, something dangerous. He was a man driven by purpose, a man with a reason to fight. And for the first time in a very long time, he felt alive. Bandit ambush, the sun was a furnace on their backs, whipping the sparse dust into whirling dervishes across the cracked earth. Colt's gaze swept the stark horizon, unease coiling in his stomach. Caution had kept him alive this long, and the unnatural stillness pressed against his senses like a shroud. Beside him, Josephine seemed distant, a troubled frown etched on her face. He hesitated to alarm her, yet he couldn't shake the sensation of unseen eyes. "Easy," he rumbled, the word a mere sigh against the dry air and protesting leather. Josephine halted her mount, her gaze questioning. "What is it?" Before he could elaborate, the silence shattered. A fusillade of gunfire tore through the air, kicking up stinging grit. Instinct took over. Colt hurled himself from his saddle, dragging Josephine down with him. Their horses, panicked by the sudden violence, whinnied in terror and vanished into the sparse vegetation. Landed heavily, the breath stolen from his lungs, but he scrambled upright, sheltering Josephine. "Stay low," he snapped, drawing his revolver. 3 figures materialized from behind the rocky outcroppings, faces masked by bandanas, rifles trained on them. Brigands, drawn by the scent of the reward her father had undoubtedly posted. Avarice, the common tongue of the West. "Well now," one of the men drawled, his voice muffled and predatory. "Looks like we found ourselves the judge's little bird." Colt ignored the taunt, his mind racing, calculating distances, angles of approach. He had to protect Josephine. This wasn't his battle, not truly. But he'd given his word. And Josephine, she was different. She'd glimpsed a flicker of humanity he thought extinguished long ago. "What do you want?" Josephine demanded, her voice a trembling thread of defiance. "What do you think, pretty thing?" the bandit sneered. "The bounty your daddy's offering, and maybe some company." A glacial rage gripped Colt. He despised these predators, those who exploited the vulnerable, who saw women as mere possessions. "You'll have to get through me," he growled, his voice a low, menacing rasp. The bandits guffawed. "You? A has-been gunslinger? You wound us. Colt didn't reply. He moved with coiled spring agility, a blur of motion. 2 rapid shots echoed across the desolate landscape, and 2 of the bandits recoiled, clutching wounded arms. The 3rd bandit raised his rifle, aiming for Josephine. Colt launched himself forward, tackling the man to the ground. They grappled, a savage, desperate dance, in the swirling dust. Blows rained down, Colt's fists finding purchase on bone and muscle. He fought with a feral intensity fueled by years of bottled-up fury and regret. He caught a glimpse of Josephine, her eyes wide with terror. He had to end this. Now. He seized the bandit's wrist, twisting until a sickening snap echoed through the air. The bandit screamed, dropping his rifle. Colt wasted no time. He slammed the bandit's skull against a jagged rock, once, twice, until the man lay motionless. The ensuing quiet was absolute. Colt rose, his breath ragged, his knuckles throbbing and bloody. He fixed his gaze on the remaining bandits, who were edging away, their faces drained of color. "Get out," he said, his voice a frozen blade. "And spread the word, whoever comes after her will find me waiting." They needed no further urging. They clambered onto their horses and fled, swallowed by the vastness of the desert. Colt turned to Josephine. She stared at him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and something deeper. He couldn't decipher it. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice gentler now. She nodded slowly. "No, I don't think so." He saw the question swirling in her eyes, the silent judgments forming. She'd witnessed the violence within him, the darkness he fought to suppress. He averted his gaze, shame washing over him. "I didn't want you to see that." "See what?" she whispered. "That I'm not who you believe me to be," he said, his voice harsh. "I'm no hero, Josephine. I'm a killer." "You saved my life," she countered, her voice gaining strength. "I took one," he said, his voice tight. "There's a world of difference." She edged closer, her eyes searching his. "He intended to harm me." "That doesn't make it justifiable," he insisted, his voice low. "Nothing ever does." He saw the doubt flicker in her eyes, the erosion of her trust. He'd anticipated this. He wasn't worthy of her faith, her belief in the possibility of redemption. "I should leave," he said, pivoting away. "You're better off without me." She grasped his arm, halting him. "No, please don't." He looked back, his pulse hammering. "Why not? You know what I'm capable of." "I also saw you defend me," she insisted, her voice trembling slightly. "I saw you risk everything, and I witnessed the remorse in your eyes afterward." Words escaped him. He'd never encountered someone who perceived him in this way, who saw beyond the shadows to something else. "I don't claim to understand you, Colt," she said, her voice barely audible. "But I refuse to believe you're solely a killer. There's something more to you than that." He yearned to believe her, desperately. But he was terrified of failing her, terrified of proving her perceptions wrong. "Don't place your trust in me, Josephine," he begged. "I'll inevitably disappoint you." She shook her head, her eyes gleaming with an unwavering resolve. "I'll risk it." She released his arm, and he remained rooted to the spot, watching her. He was unworthy of her. He was unworthy of her empathy, her faith, her hope. But he couldn't bring himself to walk away. Not now. Not after she'd witnessed his darkest side and still chosen to remain. He understood that this path was fraught with peril, that they were both treading on a knife's edge. But For the first time in what felt like an eternity, a fragile spark of something he thought lost forever flickered within him. Hope. And perhaps, just perhaps, with Josephine at his side, he might discover a path to absolution. Even an outlaw could dream of forever. Whispers of kindness, the sun hammered the cracked earth, the air thick enough to taste. Colt shielded his eyes, his gaze sweeping the distant ridges. Beside him, Josephine sat ramrod straight, her attention laser-focused on the path ahead. The memory of the bandit skirmish lingered, a palpable tension coiling between them. He felt her scrutiny, a silent assessment. He knew the verdict. A killer dwelled within. They rode on, the rhythmic cadence of hooves on dry earth and the squeak of leather their only companions. A solitary figure finally broke the monotony of the horizon, hunched near a field of stunted corn. As they approached, they saw an elderly farmer, his face a roadmap of hardship, wrestling with a breached irrigation ditch. Defeat radiated from his slumped posture. Colt halted his mount. Josephine's quizzical glance went unanswered as he dismounted and approached. "Need a hand?" His voice, though gruff, held an uncharacteristic sincerity. The farmer looked up, startled by his sudden presence. Recognition dawned. Fear flashed, swiftly masked by weary resignation. "Avery," he croaked, his voice raspy with thirst and despair. "Figured you'd be gone. Ain't nothing here for you." Colt disregarded the accusation, kneeling to examine the break. "Look straight forward," he observed, picking up a discarded shovel. "Got any spare clay?" After a moment's hesitation, the farmer gestured to a pile of hardened bricks. Colt set to work, his movements surprisingly precise. He carefully packed the clay into the breach, molding it with practiced ease. Sweat slicked his brow, but he labored until the ditch was mended. From horseback, Josephine watched, her expression an enigma. She observed the set of his jaw, the almost tender way he manipulated the soil. It was a side of him previously unseen, a sharp contrast to the ruthless efficiency displayed just hours earlier. The farmer, initial suspicion giving way to astonishment, extended a calloused hand when Colt finished. "Obliged, Avery," he said, his voice thick with gratitude. "Didn't expect this." Colt shrugged, avoiding eye contact as he wiped his hands on his worn trousers. "Just patching things up," he mumbled. Remounting, he ignored the ache in his muscles. "Let's move," he said, his tone clipped. Silence stretched between them before Josephine finally broke it. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why help him?" Colt stiffened, his gaze fixed on the winding trail. "He needed it." "But you're Colt Avery," she persisted, her voice a mix of confusion and disbelief. "You're an outlaw. Why care about a struggling farmer?" The words struck him like a blow. He remained silent, jaw clenched. Josephine pressed on. "Is that all you are, Colt? Just a killer?" He finally met her gaze, his eyes haunted. "What do you want from me, Josephine?" His voice was a rasp of pain. "Do you want a confession?" "Fine, I'm a monster. Now drop it." She shook her head, her gaze unwavering. "I don't believe it," she said quietly. "I saw something. Remorse. And now this. There's more to you than you let on, Colt Avery, and I intend to find out what it is." He looked away, his face hardening. Spurring his horse, he pulled ahead, leaving her in his dust. He couldn't bear her seeing it, the ember of kindness, the spark of compassion. It was weakness, a perilous vulnerability he couldn't afford. Vividly, a bygone life flashed through his mind. A sun-kissed farm nestled in a verdant valley. A woman with gentle eyes and a warm smile, her hands roughened by the soil. A young boy, his laughter echoing in the open air. A family. His family. That image was instantly supplanted by its antithesis, a nightmare he could never truly escape. The inferno consuming the barn, the screams piercing the night, the faces of the marauders who had stolen everything. Faces etched into his soul, fueling his vow of retribution. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to quell the onslaught of memories. They were always there, submerged yet ever present, threatening to drown him. He glanced back at Josephine, her expression contemplative, her gaze fixed on him. He couldn't conceal himself indefinitely. She perceived something within him, something he thought he had extinguished long ago, hope. But hope was a liability for a man like him. It bred vulnerability, fostered care, and character led to devastation, a pain he couldn't risk enduring again. He tugged his hat lower, shielding his eyes. He had a purpose. Finding Lily. He couldn't allow Josephine's faith in his redemption to distract him. He couldn't afford to let her become close, because she would inevitably see the truth. She would see the monster he truly was. And then she would flee. And he would be alone once more. The weight of his past was a tangible burden, crushing, suffocating. He knew he didn't warrant her kindness, but a small, desperate part of him craved it. He yearned to transcend his outlaw persona, to be deserving of her affection. But the darkness within whispered doubts, insisting he was doomed to pain and ruin. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the landscape in hues of orange and purple, Colt felt a growing unease. Eyes were on them. He was certain, cold and calculating. His paramount task was Josephine's protection. He would ensure her safety, even at the cost of his own life. The stirrings of kindness had rekindled something dormant, a flicker of hope in his shadowed existence. But he knew that hope demanded a steep price, a price he was prepared to pay. He drew his rifle, every sense alert. The whispers of kindness had awakened something within him, a flicker of hope in the darkness. But he knew that hope came at a price, and he was willing to pay it. Echoes of betrayal, the wind's fury mirrored the tempest howling within Colt. He scrutinized Josephine. The worry creasing her face troubled him more profoundly than any drawn gun. The sunset bled across the horizon, staining the world in shades of violet and furious ochre. Confession hadn't been his intention, but her palpable empathy, the bedrock certainty that he was more than his past transgressions, eroded the defenses he'd painstakingly constructed around his soul. "It was my brother," he croaked, the words like jagged stones scraping his throat. Liam's name hadn't passed his lips in years. 5 years younger. Greenhorn kid, yeah, but a spirit that dwarfed this whole forsaken territory. Josephine simply watched, her gaze unwavering, granting him needed space. The air vibrated with unspoken emotion. Colt shifted, his body protesting with stiffness. Small spread, we had. Barely scraping by, but Ma and Pa bled sweat and tears to keep it ours. Liam yearned for something beyond. The city, law school, championing the underdog. He exhaled a dry, sardonic sound. Called him a dreamer, told him dreams were a luxury we couldn't afford. Distant thunder rumbled, a guttural warning that reverberated through the soil. The first heavy raindrops plummeted, splattering against the thirsty ground. Then came the land grab, Colt continued, his voice tightening like a coiled spring. The railroad craved our acreage, offered a pittance. Pa refused, said it was generations in the blood. He paused, jaw clenched tight. The memory remained a suppurating wound, festering with years of regret and simmering rage. They sent muscle, hired thugs, intimidation tactics. Pa stood firm. Then, one night, they snuck in. While we slept, they torched the barn, the livestock. He choked, unable to articulate the horror. Josephine recoiled slightly, her hand moving instinctively, yet halting before contact. She understood the brutal truth. Liame. He bolted out to save the horses. Selfless to a fault, that boy. They were waiting. Cut him down like some rabid dog. The words were nearly inaudible, thick with repressed grief. The rain intensified. A deluge blurring the landscape into a watercolor wash. The wind shrieked, a mournful cry tearing through Colt's hair. Caw! He snapped, fought back like a man possessed. They killed him, too. Ma withered a few months later, said it was a failing heart, but it was despair, the utter annihilation of everything they'd sacrificed for, everything they be. Held sacred. He met Josephine's gaze, his eyes reflecting a bottomless well of pain. I was out that night, hunting, returned to absolute devastation, embers and headstones. He raked his drenched hair, his body trembling uncontrollably. I vowed vengeance, tracked down every last son of a bitch, made them suffer tenfold. And did vengeance bring you solace? Josephine's voice was a fragile thread against the tempest. Colt scoffed, a hollow rasp. Solace? A man like me knows no solace, just sheer survival. He turned his back to her, fixating on the storm-lashed vista. Rain sluiced down his face, indistinguishable from the tears he refused to shed. I put my faith in them. Josephine, he confessed, his voice a bare whisper. I believed the law would shield us, believed justice would prevail. I was an utter fool. Law's a charade, justice is a phantom, and trust is a fatal flaw, a shortcut to your own grave. Josephine moved closer, her expression a study in compassion. Not all trust is misplaced, Colt, she countered, her voice resolute. There are good souls in this world, people willing to fight for what's right, people who warrant your faith. He swiveled back, his eyes narrowed with skepticism. You imagine you know me, Josephine? You think you glimpse some flicker of worth within? You're deluded. I'm a killer, through and through, a petty thief, a chronic liar. I'm nothing but a plague on this earth. That's not true, she insisted, her voice ringing with conviction. I see the anguish you bear. I see the potential for good, buried beneath layers of anger and regret. And I believe you are capable of so much more than you allow yourself to be, capable of redemption. He stared, incredulous. Redemption? For a man like me? That's a fool's fantasy, Josephine. Utter fantasy. The squall raged around them, a maelstrom of wind and water. Yet, within that chaos, a nascent ember ignited within Colt. A nascent hope, a hesitant belief, something that felt perilously like love. He crushed it ruthlessly, paralyzed by the dread of losing something, someone, again. The mere thought left him gutted. Gazing at Josephine, her face illuminated by streaks of lightning, he knew he'd willingly face any peril to protect her, even if it demanded confronting his inner demons. Even if it meant laying down his own life. The tempest gradually waned, the winds diminishing, the rain softening to a drizzle. The clouds fractured, revealing a crescent moon. Colt remained immobile, drenched to the bone, his spirit aching with an ache he'd fought to suppress for an age. But for the first occasion in years, he felt a thread of hope. A hope that, by some miracle, he might discover a path to forgive himself. And, perhaps, just perhaps, prove himself worthy of Josephine's affection. The trading post. The trading post reeked of wood smoke and body odor, a pungent welcome as they neared. A raucous symphony of voices erupted from the doorway, laughter, shouts, glass on glass, a jarring contrast to the trail's hushed stillness. Colt's fingers tightened around his revolver's grip. Josephine, though visibly shaken, stood firm, her gaze locked on the rough structure, a beacon of potential answers or a swift dead end. "Ready?" Colt murmured, his voice swallowed by the din. Josephine inhaled deeply, her spine straightening. "As ready as I'll get." Inside, a churning sea of humanity swirled. Outlaws, mountain men, drifters. Their faces canvases of hardship and a ravenous need vied for space at the bar and gaming tables. The air pressed down like a shroud, lamplight carving out elongated, restless shadows. Colt's gaze, sharp and calculating, swept the room, cataloging faces, gauging threats. He moved with the predator's grace, Josephine shadowing him. They navigated the throng, the crowd yielding before Colt's imposing presence and the barely suppressed menace in his eyes. The bar, a scarred testament to countless deals, brawls, and shattered hopes, awaited. Behind it stood Maeve O'Connell, a woman hewn from the same unforgiving land. Wrinkles etched a roadmap across her face, each line a hard-won story. Her eyes, however, missed nothing, shrewd and assessing. "What'll it be?" Maeve's voice was a dry rasp, like stone grinding on stone. "Information," Colt stated, his tone leaving no room for debate. "We're looking for Lily Blake." Maeve's gaze flickered towards Josephine, a spark of recognition igniting in her eyes. The judge's daughter. Heard tell she vanished. She paused, wiping the bar with a threadbare rag. "Information comes at a price." Colt slid a silver dollar forward. "A down payment." Maeve snatched the coin, her eyes never leaving Colt's. "Lily was here, some days ago, with a man, a rough specimen, claimed to be her husband." Josephine gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Husband? That's impossible." "Maybe," Maeve shrugged. "Maybe not." "This place has seen stranger things. They went north, towards Blackwood Forest." "Who was the man?" Colt pressed, his voice hardening. "Didn't catch a name," Maeve admitted, her gaze flickering away. "But someone called him Silas." A knot tightened in Colt's stomach. He didn't like the sound of it. "Anyone else know their destination?" Maeve hesitated, her gaze flitting around the tavern. "Perhaps. But that kind of knowledge costs more than $1. Colt added another coin to the bar. "I'm a patient man, Maeve, but my patience wears thin." Maeve chuckled, a sound devoid of mirth. All right, all right. There's a fella named Finn. Skulks in the back. He hears everything. But he's slick as a graced pig." Colt nodded, his eyes hardening. "Thanks, Maeve." He turned to Josephine. "Stay put. I'll be back." Josephine gripped his arm, her fingers digging into his skin. "Be careful, Colt." His gaze softened momentarily. "Always." He gave her hand a quick squeeze before disappearing into the shadows at the back of the room. The back room possessed an even more oppressive atmosphere. The air hung thick with stale beer, sweat, and a sense of utter hopelessness. A few men huddled around a card table, their faces etched with grim determination. In a shadowy corner, nursing a drink, sat a gaunt man with darting eyes and a nervous tic. Finn. Colt approached. His movements deliberate, his presence a palpable threat. Finn? The man looked up, his eyes widening slightly. Who wants to know? Someone who needs information, Colt replied, his voice a low rumble. About Lily Blake. Finn hesitated, his gaze skittering nervously. I don't know anything about that. Colt seized Finn by the collar, yanking him to his feet. Don't play coy with me. I know you heard something. Finn coughed, struggling in Colt's grasp. All right. I heard Silas took her to some abandoned shack deep in Blackwood Forest. Said he was gonna keep her holed up there. Keep her? Colt repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. Keep her for what? Finn swallowed hard, his eyes mirroring his fear. I don't know. I swear. Just heard he wasn't planning on letting her go anytime soon. Colt released Finn, shoving him back into his chair. The information hung in the air, a palpable dread settling over Colt. Silas. The name echoed in his mind, a harbinger of trouble. He knew, with chilling certainty, that Lily was in dire straits. He turned and strode back toward the bar, his mind already churning, mapping out their next move. Josephine waited, her face etched with apprehension. What did you learn? She asked, her voice barely audible. Colt took her hand, his grip reassuring. Silas took her to a cabin in Blackwood Forest. We have to go after them. Josephine's eyes widened, fear battling with resolve. Blackwood Forest? That place is a death trap. I know, Colt said, his gaze hardening. But we have no choice. Lily's life may depend on it. He looked at Josephine, seeing her fear, but also the unwavering determination beneath. A nascent affection, both thrilling and unsettling, stirred within him. He would protect her at all costs. He turned to Maeve, his voice slicing through the tavern's din. We need supplies. Rations, ammunition, and a map of Blackwood Forest. Maeve nodded, her eyes shrewdly assessing him, recognizing the steel in his gaze. Blackwood ain't for the faint of heart. But you two seem tougher than you look. She began gathering the supplies, her movements efficient and economical. As she worked, she glanced up at Colt. Be careful out there, Avery. The forest bites. Colt met her gaze, a grim smile playing on his lips. So do I, Maeve. So do I. He knew the journey ahead would be fraught with danger, but he was ready. He had found something worth fighting for, something to atone for his past. He wouldn't let anything stand in his way. He glanced at Josephine. This was no longer just a transaction. This was everything. Bloody revelation. The trading post air hung thick with veiled menaces. Behind the counter, Maeve O'Connell, eyes like honed obsidian, quoted her price, a steep one for intel, demanded up front. Josephine, jaw set, laid out the currency. Colt watched Silas, a weasel-faced man, all nervous tics and fidgets in his chair. So, Josephine stated, voice sharp as shattered glass, the bargain sealed. Tell us about my sister. Silas gulped, his eyes flitting around like trapped birds. She was here. Said she was hitched to me. Lily. The name tasted like poison on his tongue, but she weren't content. Always dreamin' of escapin'. Where did you take her? Colt's query was a low rumble. Silas hesitated, a spark of defiance briefly igniting. Blackwood Forest. Shack out there. Remote. Just how she wanted it. A cruel smirk twisted his features, igniting a firestorm in Colt's gut. Remote from everyone but you, Josephine murmured, her tone laced with lethal softness. In a heartbeat, Silas sprang. Steel glinted, aimed for Josephine's heart. Colt moved by instinct, shoving her aside, the blade carving a fiery path across his forearm. He ignored the white-hot agony, his world shrinking to Silas. "You damn liar!" Colt exploded, his fist a thunderbolt against Silas's jaw. He stumbled, momentarily stunned, but quickly retaliated. Slashing again. The trading post descended into bedlam. Maeve dove for cover, a string of curses escaping her lips. Colt, despite the throbbing wound, fought with savage precision, his street survival instincts kicking in. Evading another strike, he executed a brutal wrist lock, the knife spinning away to clatter on the floor. He slammed Silas against the wall, trapping him. "Where is Lily?" Colt's demand was a guttural growl, his face inches from Silas's. He could feel the pulse of blood from the gash, saturating his sleeve. Fear widened Silas's eyes. "I told you. Blackwood. The old trapper's place." Colt remained unconvinced. Something felt off. He squeezed Silas's windpipe, a gentle pressure that stole his breath. "There's more," Colt rasped. "Confess." Silas choked, his face darkening. "All right. Fine. There's but chart, stashed in the shack, points to something else." She stumbled on it. That's why she was so eager to run. Colt released him, shoving him back. Silas collapsed, a wheezing heap. Colt pivoted towards Josephine, his eyes raking over her. "You okay?" he asked, his voice a rough caress. Josephine, pale but unruffled, nodded. "I'm fine. You're injured." She reached for his arm, her touch feather-light despite her concern. "It's nothing." Colt brushed it off, but the crimson tide flowed freely, smearing her fingers. He hissed as she applied a makeshift bandage. Maeve reemerged, her face a thundercloud. "You two just kicked over a wasp's nest. Silas has kin. They'll be sniffing around." "Let them," Colt said, his tone like frozen steel. "We're going to Blackwood." Josephine, dismissing Maeve's warning glance, met Colt's gaze. "Then let's ride." They quit the trading post, the sinking sun drawing out elongated shadows. Colt felt a creeping unease. It wasn't merely Silas's associates that troubled him. It was the map. The way Silas had hesitated a sensation like approaching quicksand. He regarded Josephine, her face a mask of resolve. Would not let misfortune befall her. Not again. As they spurred their horses onward, Colt's thoughts whirled. The forest loomed, a ravenous maw of darkness. He recalled his own fractured youth, lost in a similar wilderness of his making. He was supposed to be the harbinger of shadows, not a guardian angel. Yet here he stood, arm aflame, hammering, prepared to face any horror for Josephine's well-being. A strange form of absolution, wrought not in flames, but in the steadfast, unwavering faith reflected in Josephine's eyes. They arrived at the edge of Blackwood Forest as twilight deepened. A biting cold descended, the trees morphing into grotesque, spindly figures. Colt dismounted, his senses wired. He scrutinized the earth, seeking signs. "This way." He indicated a subtle indentation leading into the woods. Seems Silas wasn't completely dishonest about the shack. They advanced cautiously, Colt leading, his hand near the grip of his revolver. The forest was hushed, save for the whisper of leaves and the melancholy call of an owl. A silence that was ominous, a prelude to untold perils. Eventually, the shack materialized. A decrepit ruin, barely upright, roof caved in, windows sealed. It appeared deserted, long forgotten. But Colt suspected otherwise. He could almost taste the presence of someone, something, lurking within. He gestured Josephine to remain behind him. He approached the shack gingerly, weapon at the ready. He kicked the door inwards, hinges screeching a discordant warning. The interior was gloomy, fetid, redolent with decay. A sliver of moonlight pierced through a crack in the boarded-up window, dimly illuminating the space. It appeared vacant, or so he thought. Colt scanned the room, his vision adjusting to the gloom. A wobbly table sat in the center, coated in dust. A threadbare blanket lay crumpled on the floor, presumably Lily's bed. He moved to the table, sweeping his hand across the surface. He detected a minute, nearly invisible depression. He pressed down, and a concealed compartment sprang open, revealing a piece of folded parchment. A map, not of the forest, but of something grander, more meaningful. It depicted a series of landmarks, converging on a spot marked with a bold X. Beneath the map, scrawled in shaky letters, was a single word, hope. As Colt studied the map, a sound behind him spun him around. Josephine stood in the doorway, her face drained of color. Behind her, cast in shadow, stood Silas. He hefted a pistol, trained directly on Colt. "Hello, Avery," Silas sneered. "Looks like you found our dirty little secret." But Silas wasn't alone. Emerging from the forest's embrace were 4 more figures, all armed, all radiating menace. They had been lying in wait. An ambush. A calculated, bloody trap, Colt realized, with sickening certainty, but they sought more than just the map. They were after him, and Josephine had walked head first into the path. This wasn't simply about Lily now. It was about a conspiracy, far more sinister, with far more deadly consequences. He had walked straight into the snare, lured by a spark of optimism and a desperate urge to shield the woman he was growing to cherish. Now, he had to secure their escape. Forbidden touch, the Blackwood shack receded into an unwanted memory as they rode. Silas and his cohort a dwindling concern in their wake. Each jolt of the horse sent a fresh spike of pain through Colt's side. Worry clouded Josephine's features, her usual spirit subdued by the day's ordeal. They located a small clearing, tucked away in a dense pine thicket where the atmosphere was thick with the tang of moist earth and pine sap. Colt dismounted with a grunt, his hand automatically clamping down on the wound. "Let's have a look," Josephine murmured, her tone gentler than usual. She reached for his shirt, her fingers briefly gracing the rough texture of his skin. An unexpected tremor jolted through him, unwelcome and unsettling. He recoiled, not from the pain, but from the unfamiliarity of her touch. He shrugged her hand away, pivoting. "It's nothing, just a graze." His voice held a gruff edge, dismissive. Josephine stood her ground, her eyes, the shade of a brewing squall, sharpened. "Don't be absurd, Colt. You were shot. Let me assist." She rummaged through her saddlebag, producing a small flask of whiskey and a length of clean cloth. Argument proved useless. Josephine Blake was not easily dissuaded. He settled heavily onto a fallen trunk, wincing as the movement aggravated his injury. He tugged his shirt open, revealing the angry, raw gash that defaced his flesh. Josephine inhaled sharply, her fingers hovering near the injury. "Silas is responsible." Not a query, but a statement. He got lucky. Colt's attempt at nonchalance rang hollow, a lie that settled like lead in his stomach. She applied the whiskey to the wound, eliciting a sharp hiss, a swift intake of breath from Colt. The alcohol seared like liquid fire, a welcome distraction from the burgeoning warmth that began to emanate from where Josephine's steadying hand touched his flank. "Hold still," she murmured, her brow furrowed in concentration. She worked with unexpected tenderness, cleansing the wound with meticulous care. Colt watched her, captivated by the way her dark hair framed her face, the graceful line of her cheek, the unwavering focus held within her gaze. He'd witnessed her anger, her resolve, even her fear, but not this vulnerability, concern, and utter captivation. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken sentiments and a tension bordering on unbearable. He felt the warmth radiating from her, a subtle but insistent magnetic pull threatening to breach the fortified defenses he had erected around his heart. "Why are you doing this?" he rasped, his voice barely audible. Josephine glanced up, her eyes locking with his. The unanswered question lingered. Was he questioning her attentiveness to his injury, her willingness to risk all to locate her sister, or her very association with a man like himself? "Because it's the only decent thing to do," she stated finally, her voice unwavering. "And you're helping me with Lily." While he sensed the truth within her assertion, he also perceived a deeper, unspoken layer hidden beneath the surface. He felt an urge to reach out, to trace the soft contours of her face, but resisted, knowing such a gesture would betray everything he held true about himself. He was an outlaw, branded by a past steeped in violence and regret. He could offer Josephine Blake only peril and heartache. She finished bandaging his side, her fingers lingering momentarily against his skin. Their gazes met, and for a fleeting instant, the world seemed to dissolve away. He detected a flicker within her eyes, a spark of yearning mirroring his own. A perilous, forbidden desire threatened to consume them both. He broke the contact, turning away abruptly. "We need to move," he said, his tone rougher now. "Silas won't simply concede." Josephine nodded, a faint blush warming her face. She gathered her belongings, her actions brisk and efficient. The moment had vanished, yet its lingering echo remained palpable, a stark reminder of the gulf separating them and the perilous allure threatening to bridge it. They mounted their horses in silence, the unspoken words hanging thick in the air. As they rode deeper into the woods, Colt couldn't dismiss the intuition that they were heading not just towards Lily, but toward a reckoning with their own hearts. Later, as they established camp for the night, the fire snapped and crackled, casting a wild choreography of shadows across the surrounding trees. Colt remained slightly apart, cradling a cup of lukewarm coffee. Josephine sat opposite him, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "Thank you," he finally uttered, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. Josephine looked up, her expression an enigma. "For what?" "For patching me up. For not abandoning me." She shrugged. "You're not an easy man to abandon, Colt Avery." He chuckled, a humorless, brittle sound. "You clearly don't know me very well." "Perhaps not," she conceded. "But I see qualities within you that you fail to recognize." He scoffed. "Such as? A saintly nature?" "No," she countered, her voice gentle but resolute. "A man capable of being saved." The impact of her words landed squarely, a physical blow. Salvation. He hadn't dared to voice that notion, a concept he had long discarded. He was undeserving of redemption. A killer, a thief, a man who had only inflicted pain and sorrow. "Don't invest your hopes in me, Josephine," he advised, his voice low and cautionary. "You'll find yourself disappointed." "I'm unafraid of disappointment," she replied, her eyes locking onto his. "And I don't believe you're as irredeemable as you want me to believe." He averted his gaze, unable to sustain hers. The truth was, fear gripped him. Fear of exposing the darkness within him, the demons that haunted his every waking moment. Fear of allowing himself to hope, only to have it violently extinguished. He took a lengthy swallow of his coffee, the bitterness a welcome anesthetic. The fire crackled, the shadows swayed, and silence descended once more, heavier than before. He knew Josephine watched him, anticipating some expression, any word. But he remained mute, trapped between a grim past and an undeserved future. A future featuring a woman he could never possess. He flung the remaining coffee into the fire, causing the embers to flare in noisy protest. He stood, his movements deliberate and awkward. "I'll take the first watch," he announced, his voice flat. Josephine didn't argue, only nodded, her eyes reflecting a sadness that mirrored his own. As he retreated into the encompassing darkness, he couldn't quell the sense that he was fleeing not merely from her, but from his very self. He was evading the potential for hope, for salvation, for love, and he understood, with a chilling certainty, that he was committing the gravest error of his existence. Shadows of the mind long before redemption's outskirts materialized. The air thickened with a cloying miasma of sulfur and sorrow. A cruel jest played by its very name upon the gaunt figures listlessly dragging themselves. Through the dust, dilapidated structures sagged like decaying teeth, vacant windows like sightless orbs reflecting a forgotten world. The sun, a brutal overlord, scorched the land, baking the earth into a kiln. Colt halted Jericho, his gaze encompassing the town. A prison forged not from iron, but from despair itself. He inhaled its essence, tasted its bitterness, a metallic tang of desperation that clung to everything. "Cade's grip is tighter than anticipated," he rumbled, his voice a low vibration. Josephine, astride her own steed, her expression a rigid mask, assessed the scene. The usual sparkle of hope in her eyes had been extinguished, supplanted by flinty determination. "Then we'll have to loosen it," she responded, her tone unwavering, although Colt detected a tremor beneath the surface. This blatant theater of human misery had clearly struck a nerve. Their horses' hooves struck the parched earth, a solitary percussion as they entered the town. Men paused in their labors, their faces crinkled with mistrust and dread. From shadowed doorways, a few women, their faces etched with premature age, regarded them with guarded curiosity, tinged with fear. Silence reigned. The mind dominated the town's heart, a monstrous maw that gaped at the sky, spewing forth a plume of black smoke, a perpetual stain. Nearby, a roughly built gallows groaned in the wind, a grim testament to Cade's dominion. Reclining indolently before a saloon were several rough-looking men, hands near their pistol grips. Cade's sentinels. Colt dismounted, his senses heightened. He moved with economical grace, his body a tightly wound spring, poised to unleash. Josephine followed, her movements lacking his fluidity, yet no less resolute. She advanced with purpose, chin lifted, exuding a quiet fortitude that even these hardened men seemed to acknowledge. One of them peeled himself away from the group, ambling toward them with a swagger. Tall and powerfully built, his face bore a roadmap of old scars, and a cruel smile that failed to reach his eyes. "Well now," he drawled, menace lacing his voice. "Looks like we got some company. And fancy company at that." He spat a dark stream of tobacco juice onto the parched ground. "What brings you city folk to redemption? There ain't much here but dust and toil." Colt met his gaze, his own eyes glacial. "We're searching for someone," he stated, his voice devoid of inflection. "A young woman, goes by the name of Lily Blake." The man's smile widened into a predatory grin, revealing more gums than teeth. "Lily Blake, you say? Never heard of her. This here's Cade's domain. We don't cotton to strangers asking questions." "Perhaps," Josephine interjected, stepping forward, her voice resonating with authority, "you haven't been asking the right questions yourself. My father is Judge Samuel Blake, and I assure you, Mr. Cade will be keenly interested to learn of your lack of cooperation." The man's eyes narrowed shrewdly. Even here, the name resonated, carrying weight. He hesitated, then flicked his head toward the saloon. "Cade's inside, but don't get your hopes up. Hospitality ain't exactly his strong suit." Colt placed a restraining hand on Josephine's arm. "Let me handle this," he murmured. "This is my arena, not yours." She met his gaze, her eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and anxiety. "Be careful, Colt." With a curt nod, he turned and strode toward the saloon, pushing through the swinging doors into the smoky gloom. The air inside reeked of stale whiskey and unwashed bodies. Men were slumped over tables, their expressions bleak, their eyes skittish. At the room's far end, a hulking figure with a thick neck and a scarred visage sat behind a rough-hewn desk, counting coins. "Virgil Cade." Colt advanced, his boots thudding against the wooden floor. Cade glanced up, his gaze calculating and cold. He scrutinized Colt for a moment, then a slow, predatory smile crept across his face. "Well, well," he rumbled, his voice a low growl. "What washed in with the dust? Another cur come to lick at my scraps." "I'm looking for a woman," Colt replied, his voice even. "Lily Blake. I understand you might have information." Cade chuckled, a grating, mirthless sound. "Lily Blake? Now why would I know anything about her?" He paused, his eyes hardening. "Unless you're working for the judge." "I'm working for her sister," Colt corrected. Cade leaned back in his chair, his gaze unwavering. "You're a fool to set foot here. This is my fiefdom, my edicts, and I brook no interference from outsiders." "I'm not seeking permission," Colt stated, his hand hovering near his revolver's handle. "I'm informing you. I want to know her whereabouts." Cade's smile evaporated, replaced by a glacial stare. He inclined his head toward one of his men, who moved forward, drawing his weapon. "Perhaps you require some persuasion." Before the man could react, Colt moved with blinding speed. His revolver materialized in his hand, and he fired, the bullet finding its mark squarely in the center of the man's chest. The man collapsed, lifeless before he struck the floor. Pandemonium erupted. Men scrambled for their weapons, their faces distorted with fury. Colt remained rooted, his eyes sweeping the room, his finger poised on the trigger. "Ho!" Cade bellowed, his voice slicing through the cacophony. Hesitation rippled through the men, their eyes flitting between Cade and Colt. Cade rose from his chair, his face contorted in a mask of rage. "You think you can just stroll in here and execute one of my men? You've got another thing coming." "I'm not here to instigate a conflict," Colt responded, his voice calm despite the surrounding chaos. "I simply want to know the location of Lily Blake. Tell me, and I'll depart. Refuse, and this entire town will be reduced to ash." Cade glared at him, his eyes incandescent with fury. But Colt detected something else lurking there, a flicker of trepidation. Cade recognized his resolve. He knew Colt was capable of anything. "She's in the mine," Cade finally conceded, his voice grudging. "Working." Colt's eyes narrowed. "Working? What sort of work?" Cade shrugged. "The same as everyone else. Extracting ore." Colt disbelieved him. The lie was evident in his gaze. But he knew he would extract nothing further from him here. "Escort me to her," he demanded. Cade hesitated, then nodded to another one of his men. "Show him," he spat, his voice venomous. "But keep him under surveillance." The man, his expression surly, led Colt from the saloon toward the mine. As they walked, Colt spotted Josephine standing across the street, her hand resting on the butt of her own revolver. Their eyes locked, and he offered a subtle nod, reassuring her of his well-being. The mine was a dark, oppressive abyss, the atmosphere thick with dust and the fetid scent of sweat and fear. Men labored in the dim, flickering light, their faces masked in grime, their bodies bent with exhaustion. The rhythmic clang of pickaxes against rock reverberated through the tunnels, a relentless, monotonous dirge of despair. The man guided Colt deeper into the mine, past rows of listless workers, their eyes vacant, their spirits broken. Finally, they arrived at a small, claustrophobic tunnel, where a group of women were digging, their faces gaunt and pallid. Colt scanned their faces, his heart pounding against his ribs. And then he recognized her. Lily Blake. She was thinner than he remembered, her face pale and streaked with dirt, but her eyes retained a spark of defiance. "Lily!" he called out, his voice booming through the tunnel. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Colt?" she whispered, her voice raspy. He surged toward her, pushing past the other women, reaching to touch her face. "Are you unharmed?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm functional, but—" She hesitated, glancing around nervously. "They're forcing us to work, ceaselessly. They barely provide sustenance. And," she lowered her voice, "they select women nightly. I'm unsure of their destination, but they return altered." Colt's blood turned to ice. He understood her implications. Cade wasn't merely exploiting these people, he was desecrating them. He was a monster incarnate. "We're getting out of here," he vowed. Infiltration whirlwinds of grit and dust heralded their arrival at redemption's blighted edge. The town's very name felt like a taunt, a daily judgment on its denizens' hard-luck lives. Ever the strategist, Colt outlined their entry. "We're ghosts. You're a traveling dressmaker, inquiring after possibilities. I'm your escort." The last word felt like gravel in his mouth. Subtlety is key. Avoid attention at all costs. Josephine, her face shadowed by a borrowed shawl, looked him square in the eye. "And the notorious Colt Avery? What role will he play?" A fleeting smile played on his lips. "Just a shade. A drifter skilled at burying secrets." Dusk cloaked their entrance, the atmosphere heavy with coal's acrid tang and the stink of broken dreams. Buildings slumped, flaking paint mirroring the weariness etched onto every face they passed. Only the Black Nugget Saloon pulsed with activity, its windows throwing patches of boisterous light onto the dusty street. "Our starting point," Colt murmured, steering her towards the din. Inside, the Black Nugget was a haven of opacity. Smoke, cheap liquor, and stale sweat hum thick in the air. Men, coarsened by labor and lubricated by rot gut, clustered around tables, their voices a low growl broken by the occasional bark of laughter or crude oath. Colt guided Josephine to a secluded corner, ordering 2 shots from a jaded-looking bartender. "Hold the ice," he grunted, his gaze a restless search of the room. Apprehension flickered in Josephine's eyes as she watched him. This shadowy domain was alien to her, yet a fragile trust in Colt was taking root. "What are we hunting for?" she breathed. "Information. Any whispers regarding Lily? Anything about Cade's operation? The nature of this forsaken place?" He downed his whiskey, the fiery liquid doing little to thaw his hardened features. They listened, sifting through the murmur, gleaning tidbits of truth from drunken boasts and veiled threats. The mine was redemption's very core, also its ailment. Cade held sway over everything, from meager wages to the dwindling water supply. And Lily toiled within its depths. "She's not faring well," a slurred voice leaked from the adjacent table. "Cade's working her double shifts, claims she's been a thorn in his side." Colt's grip tightened on his glass, knuckles bone white. Josephine covered his hand, silently imploring restraint. "Trouble?" "What sort?" she asked evenly. The speaker, eyes glazed, fixed on her with drunken focus. "Asking the wrong questions. Ruffling feathers. Cade doesn't tolerate that." A dry, rattling chuckle escaped him. "Got fire in her, that one. Too much for her own good." More fragments assembled, painting a bleak picture. Lily's resistance, Cade's brutality, the miner's pervasive fear. Josephine felt a surge of indignation, a fervent desire to shatter the walls imprisoning her sibling. Restraint and careful strategy must take priority. As the hours crawled, Colt navigated the saloon with understated assurance, becoming one with the rough-hewn crowd. Cards were played, drinks bought, ears remained open. He learned Cade harbored a particular interest in Lily, a predatory obsession that sent icy tendrils down Josephine's spine. Later, as they slipped back into the moonless night, Josephine turned to Colt, her expression a blend of gratitude and unease. "You transformed in there," she observed. "You knew the contours of that world." He shrugged, his gaze drawn to the distant mine shafts, starkly outlined against the night sky. "It's a world I know intimately, but you didn't relish it," she pressed, her voice low. "You weren't enjoying it. You were zeroed in." Finally, he met her gaze, a hint of vulnerability flickering within. "My focus is on retrieving your sister. Nothing else has consequence." She perceived then the unwavering resolution beneath the cynical armor. A man who had traversed darkness and emerged with a potent sense of what was just, poised to wager everything for a conviction. Not the justice of courtrooms, the rigid constructs her father espoused. This was something primal, forged from personal hardship and a visceral comprehension of right and wrong. "Thank you, Colt," she murmured, emotion lacing her voice, "for undertaking this." He averted his gaze, jaw clenched. "Save your thanks. We're only beginning." He paused, then added, almost against his will, "And maybe this is a chance for me to set something right." Dawn saw them observing the miners trudging to their wretched labor. Hunched figures, they moved like automatons, their faces grim. Colt gestured toward a group of women accompanying them. "They carry meals and care for the injured. Lily might be among them." Josephine nodded, her pulse quickening. They waited until the women neared the mine entrance, then feigned idle curiosity as they approached. "Excuse me," Josephine said to one of the women, a young woman with weary eyes and weathered hands. "We're new here. We are just wondering about working the mines. Suspicion clouded the woman's features. It's brutal, she stated flatly. But it's all there is. Do you know Lily Blake? Josephine asked, barely audible. The woman's eyes widened in alarm, and she cast a nervous glance around. I can't speak about her. Please, Josephine pleaded. I'm her sister. I only need to know she's safe. Hesitation wrestled with fear. Then the woman nodded toward a derelict shack near the mine entrance. She's in the infirmary. Injured yesterday. Josephine's heart lurched. Hurt? How? Cade. He punished her for her words, accused her of inciting revolt. The woman's voice quivered. Go, quickly, before we're noticed. Colt, his face a taut mask of suppressed fury, guided Josephine toward the ramshackle clinic. The air inside the small building tasted of antiseptic and despair. A young woman lay on a cot, her face ashen and marred with bruises. Lily! Lily! Josephine cried, rushing to her sister's side. Lily's eyes fluttered open, her gaze distant. Josephine? She whispered. Is it truly you? I'm here, Lily, Josephine assured, grasping her hand. I've come to bring you home. But before Lily could answer, a voice thundered from the doorway. Well, well, what have we here? Cade stood there, a cruel smile contorting his features. Looks like the little bird has brought her own cage. The infirmary air was thick, a nauseating blend of iron and antiseptic. Josephine, her fingers laced tightly with Lily's, felt a delicate shiver course through her sister. We're getting you out, she vowed, her voice a gritty whisper despite the tremor in her own grip. Colt stood guard by the doorway, his gaze sweeping the shadowed hall, a silent bulwark against unseen threats. Then, a voice, oily and unwelcome, shattered the fragile peace. Well now, what have we here? Jebediah, the saloon keeper, lounged against the frame, a slick grin distorting his features. Two brutes, hulking and impassive, filled the space behind him, effectively sealing their exit. A muscle ticked in Colt's jaw. He'd misjudged Jebediah entirely. Jebediah, Colt began, his tone a low growl. Explain yourself. The saloon owner gave a dry, humorless chuckle. Explanation? Business, Mr. Avery. Cade pays handsomely for information, especially on runaways. And a meddling judge's daughter? That's worth a king's ransom, wouldn't you agree? He punctuated his words with a gob of spit, a vile dismissal. Plus, there's a bonus for escaped mine rats. His gaze lingered on Lily, a predatory gleam in his eye. The color drained from Josephine's face. Betrayal churned in her stomach like a poisoned draught. You knew? Let's just say a seamstress with sandpaper hands doesn't exactly disappear, Miss Blake. And a fancy gun like yours flags you as Avery's associate. Cade's no fool. Colt moved with a speed that belied his size, thrusting Josephine and Lily behind him. Get them out, he rasped, his hand instinctively diving for the knife sheathed beneath his coat. Don't be absurd, Jebediah sneered, stepping aside with a flourish. Cade filled the doorway, his eyes like chips of flint, gleaming with cold triumph. Looks like the canary has returned to its cage. He gestured to his men. Take them. The ensuing melee was a storm of flailing limbs and desperate struggles. Colt fought with a savage grace, each strike fueled by a fierce protectiveness. Josephine, overriding her fear, seized a thick glass bottle from a nearby table and brought it down on the skull of one of Cade's thugs, the shattering report echoing off the confined walls. Lily, weakened as she was, fought like a cornered wildcat, raking and clawing. But numbers told. A blow to Colt's jaw sent stars exploding behind his eyes. The metallic tang of blood filled his mouth, mingling with the bitter taste of treachery. He saw one of Cade's men seize Josephine, wrenching her arm up her back. "Let her go!" Colt bellowed, lunging forward with a roar. Cade chuckled, closing the distance to Josephine. "Such misplaced loyalty! Tell me, Judge's daughter, did you truly believe you could stroll into my town and pilfer what is mine?" His grip tightened, and Josephine cried out, a choked sound of agony. Colt, witnessing her pain, realized the fight was unwinnable. Escape was their only option. With a primal bellow, he slammed his forehead into the face of Josephine's captor, sending the man sprawling. Snatching Josephine's hand, then Lily's, he dragged them toward the infirmary's rear. "Back exit," he grunted, his veins thrumming with adrenaline. "Run!" "Don't stop!" They spilled into a grimy alley, the clamor of pursuit hot on their heels. Redemption was no longer a sanctuary. Jebediah's perfidy had exposed them, and Cade would relentlessly hound them. They bolted, their breaths ragged and shallow, the unyielding ground bruising their feet. Colt led them through a labyrinth of tight passageways, every nerve screaming with awareness, searching for any sign of lurking menace. The shouts of Cade's posse grew louder, their heavy footfalls shaking the earth. Reaching the town's edge, Colt plunged into the thick woods that bordered Redemption. The wilderness was now their only hope. They vanished into the shadows, the trees offering meager concealment from their pursuers. The forest floor was a snare of roots and fallen limbs, hindering their progress. Lily, weakened still, stumbled often, her face ashen with exhaustion. Josephine, her dress ripped and stained, supported her sibling, her eyes resolute. Colt, his body screaming in protest, pushed onward, driven by the desperate need to shield them. He knew Cade's men would be tireless in their hunt. They knew this land, and they wouldn't yield until they had them trapped. As night descended, the forest took on a more ominous cast, the shadows playing tricks on their eyes. The sounds of the woods, usually comforting, now amplified the danger, every rustle and snap sending a jolt of terror through them. They pressed forward, Colt in the lead, his senses honed to a razor's edge, straining to detect any sign of their pursuers. Time was running out. They desperately needed shelter, a place to rest and regroup, before Cade's men closed in. Suddenly, a gunshot cracked through the silence, the projectile whistling past Colt's ear. He cursed under his breath. This was no longer a chase, it was a hunt. He shoved Josephine and Lily behind a dense thicket of trees. "Stay put," he commanded, his voice low and urgent. "Don't make a sound. I'll lead them away." Josephine clutched his arm, her eyes wide with fear. "No, Colt, please don't." "I have to," he said, his voice steel. "It's the only way to keep you safe." He gently unclasped her hand, his heart twisting at the terror reflected in her gaze. He turned and vanished into the inky blackness, the clamor of his pursuers swelling behind him. Josephine watched him disappear, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, a silent prayer escaping her lips. He was risking his life for them, a sacrifice to grant them a chance. Lily coughed, cradling her side. He's a good man, Joe." Josephine nodded, tears stinging her eyes. "He is, Lily, he is." But the realization brought scant comfort. Jebediah's betrayal, Cade's relentless pursuit, and now Colt's selfless act had left her feeling exposed, vulnerable, and consumed by dread. The wilderness, once promising freedom, now felt like a trap, forcing them into a desperate fight. The future, once bright with possibilities, now loomed dark, fraught with uncertainty and peril. Confessions in the night, the rock overhang offered scant shelter, little more than a scooped-out hollow in the sandstone slope. Josephine burrowed deeper into the cool recess, the desert night leaching warmth from her marrow. Beside her, Lily slumbered, her small face wan against the coarse blanket. Colt stood sentinel near the opening, a stark figure etched against the tapestry of stars. A flicker of pain crossed his features, quickly masked, but Josephine knew his injury throbbed worse than he admitted. "Colt," she breathed, her voice a mere thread against the wind's whisper. "You need to rest." He remained unmoved. "Can't. Gotta watch." "You can barely stand. We both see that." She pushed up, wincing at the protest of her weary muscles. "Let me spell you." He finally turned, his expression a mystery in the faint light. "Your rest is worth more." "So is yours," she insisted, softening her tone. "Colt, you pulled us through. Let me return the favor." He hesitated, then slowly lowered himself to the ground, each movement a testament to his pain. Leaning against the cool stone, he closed his eyes. Josephine fetched the waterskin and a strip of torn fabric. Kneeling, she gently cleansed the blood blossoming on his makeshift bandage. "Josephine," he murmured, his voice a low rasp. "There's something I gotta say." Her hand faltered. She studied him, her pulse a frantic drum against her ribs. The air thrummed with unspoken truths, the accumulated weight of their ordeal, their shared risks. He opened his eyes, his gaze locking onto hers. "I ain't much," he began, the familiar self-deprecating tone a knife twisting in her heart. "Done things I regret, can't undo 'em." "Colt." She started, wanting to silence him, to shield him from his own torment. He shook his head, stopping her. "No, let me finish. Before it's too late." He inhaled deeply, the words wrenched from him like confessions. "Before you, I was empty, just wasted days and a heavy conscience. You're the only light I've ever found, Josephine." Her breath hitched. She had sensed, deep down, the current flowed stronger than friendship, deeper than gratitude, but hearing the words, witnessing the exposed nerve in his eyes, robbed her of breath. "Coulter," she repeated, barely audible. He reached out, his rough hand cradling her cheek. The calloused warmth sent a tremor through her. "I love you, Josephine. I know I ain't the man you deserve, got nothing but trouble and danger to offer, but I swear I'd do anything for you. I'd give my life." Tears pricked her eyes, blurring his image. She leaned into his touch, her heart overflowing with a torrent of emotion. She loved him too. She had succumbed gradually, inexorably, despite her resistance. His valor, his unshakable loyalty, the unexpected tenderness they had eroded her defenses until denial became impossible. "I love you too, Colt," she whispered, her voice trembling like a leaf. A flicker of a smile graced his lips. "Never thought I'd hear those words." But anxiety remained, a cold weight in her gut. She drew back slightly, searching his gaze. "What comes next, Colt? Once we find Lily, what then?" His smile vanished, replaced by a bleakness that mirrored her own. He knew the obstacle she named. His past, the sentence hanging over him. The relentless law it all stood between them like an impassable fortress. "I don't know," he confessed, his voice heavy with defeat. "I just needed you to know. Didn't want to leave this world without you knowing." She brushed a stray lock of hair from his brow, her touch feather-light. "Don't say that. "We'll find a way. We have to." But the words rang hollow even to her own ears. The odds were overwhelmingly against them. The world felt brutal and unforgiving, and joy a scarce commodity for those like them. She glanced at Lily, still deep in slumber, blissfully ignorant of the storm-gathering force. She had to protect her sister. She had to protect Colt. But how could she safeguard them both when their destinies were so precarious, so entangled in risk and deceit? The burden of their love, the weight of their circumstances, crushed her. She squeezed her eyes shut, tears tracing hot paths down her cheeks. She had discovered love in the most barren of landscapes, with the most unlikely of souls. But could their love withstand the tempest that threatened to engulf them? She couldn't know. All she knew was she would fight fiercely. For Lily, for Colt, for a future that felt impossible. She would struggle until her strength failed. The fortress of fear, the sun was a brutal hammer, forging the earth into cracked, dry scales. Colt's hand became a visor as he peered towards their destination. Not a true fort, but a warren of adobe structures, barricaded behind a formidable wall of jagged stone and impaling stakes. 3 sentries, rifles slung with deceptive casualness, patrolled with granite faces. "Some welcome," Colt rasped, his throat tight. Josephine, worry creasing her brow, tugged at her hat. "How many do you figure are holed up inside?" Tough to say. Considering the layout and the presumed resources, a dozen at the minimum. Could be more. His gaze swept the terrain, probing for vulnerabilities. Defensible position, commanding view, limited concealment. They spent the subsequent hour circling, hugging the ground, exploiting meager patches of scrub for cover. Despite his injuries, Colt moved with a lithe economy, senses honed to the whisper of wind, the twitch of a rabbit. Josephine shadowed him, her resolve a palpable force. They discovered a potential ingress, a compromised section of the wall, where a slide had nibbled away at the base. A gamble, but their sole prospect. As twilight bled across the sky, painting it with bruised oranges and violets, they sought refuge in a small cave carved into a nearby gully. The air within was a clammy balm against the desert's fiery kiss. Colt coaxed a small fire into life, its flickering light dancing on the rock face. Josephine huddled beside him, arms clasped around her knees, her gaze lost in the shifting flames. "It's a death sentence, isn't it?" she breathed, barely audible. Colt held his silence. He studied the fire, his expression unreadable as stone. "It's a slim chance," he conceded, "but not a forfeit. Not if we're smart, if we tread carefully." He turned, his eyes seeking hers. "We require a plan, dawn assault, when they're likely to be least alert. We exploit the weakened wall. I'll stage a distraction, divert their attention from the entry point. You slip in, locate Lily, and extract her." Josephine's jaw firmed. "I won't leave you." "You won't be. But Lily is the priority. That was the agreement, remember?" He reached for her hand, his grip gentle but firm. "You must promise me, Josephine. Promise me you'll do whatever it takes to get her out of there, even if it means abandoning me." Tears pricked her eyes. "I can't make that promise." "You can. You must. Lily's survival hinges on it." He squeezed her hand, his gaze unwavering and intense. "I know it's a weighty request, but I have faith in you, Josephine. I know you possess the strength to do this." She looked at him, her heart aching with dread. She saw the steel in his gaze, the quiet fortitude that belied his weathered appearance. He was right. Lily's fate came first. "I promise. She choked out, her voice thick with emotion. The remainder of the evening was spent dissecting their strategy, anticipating potential pitfalls, accounting for every contingency. Colt sketched out the plan with grim efficiency, his mind laser-focused. He acknowledged the unfavorable odds but refused to succumb to despair. He now had a purpose, a reason to persevere. As the night deepened, the fire dwindled, plunging the cave into near obscurity. Josephine shivered, drawing her shawl tighter. Noticing, Colt retrieved a nearby blanket and draped it around her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice laced with gratitude. They sat in introspective silence, punctuated only by the crackling embers. The impending conflict hung heavy in the air. Finally, Josephine broke the silence, her tone hesitant. "Colta, about what you said before?" He turned, his expression guarded. "What about it?" "Ah, I was sincere as well. I do love you." Her gaze fell, avoiding his. "But I'm terrified of what might befall us. Terrified of what they might do to you." Colt reached to you. Out, gently tilting her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. "I know," he murmured, his voice filled with tenderness. "I'm afraid too." He leaned in, his lips ghosting over hers, a gentle kiss, a tentative expression of shared emotion, but also a kiss imbued with yearning, with a desperate aspiration for a future that felt impossibly distant. They broke apart, their eyes locked. "We'll get through this," Colt stated, his voice resolute. "We'll rescue Lily, and then we'll find our way." He knew it was a fabrication. He knew that even if they lived, his past would forever cast a long shadow. But he needed to voice it, needed to offer them both a fragile hope to cling to. He pulled her close, enveloping her in his arms. They lay down together, the blanket a scant barrier against the encroaching cold. Josephine nestled against him, her body trembling almost imperceptibly. Colt held her firmly, offering what solace he could. He closed his eyes, attempting to shut out the fear, the uncertainty. He concentrated on Josephine, on the warmth of her body pressed against his, on the delicate fragrance of wildflowers clinging to her hair. He clung to her, to the hope she represented, to the prospect of a future he never thought he merited. He would confront that stronghold of dread, and he would do all it took to safeguard both her and Lily, even if it demanded his all. Redemption's price as dawn bled across the desert horizon, painting the sands with strokes of coral and saffron. The prelude to violence began. Colt cinched his bandana tighter, the fine desert dust already a gritty film against his skin. Beside him, Josephine's face, though pale, radiated a fierce resolve, her gaze mirroring the ardent hues above. He saw not fear, but an icy core of purpose. "Ready?" he rasped, voice muffled by the fabric. A curt nod was her reply, her fingers locked around the rifle stock. For Lily. They advanced in silence, Colt leading, close to the adobe walls, seeking the scant concealment offered by shadows. He reached the breached spot, its mortar gnawed away by years of sun and wind, ripe for his purpose. He set a small charge of black powder, calibrated just enough to fracture the wall without collapsing it completely. A quick glance, and he ignited the fuse. The blast ripped through the morning quiet, a concussive wave that shook the very air. Splintered adobe. Erupted, leaving a jagged cavity. Colt didn't hesitate. He plunged into the breach, revolver blazing, each shot a thunderclap in the confined space. Bedlam descended, figures dove for cover, weapons barking in response. The air stung with the bitter tang of bird powder, and the cries of the injured. Josephine followed on Colt's heels, her rifle a blur of controlled fury, each shot finding its mark with chilling accuracy. Their movements were fluid, a deadly synergy forged by days of relentless pursuit. Inside, the compound unfolded like a twisted maze of corridors and chambers. Colt knew time was short. They had to reach Lily before Cade could spirit her away. He shouldered open a door, revealing a room stacked with supplies. Empty. Another. And another, this one occupied by two men caught in the midst of a card game. Their surprise was quickly extinguished by Colt's swift, decisive fire. "Lily!" Josephine's voice, ragged with desperation, echoed through the structure. "Lily!" A thin, wavering reply cut through the chaos. "Josephine?" The sound originated from the depths of the hideout. Colt forged ahead, battling through the remaining resistance, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. They found her imprisoned within a small, lightless cell, manacles binding her to the wall. Lily was emaciated, her eyes wide and haunted. Josephine rushed forward, her con, fingers fumbling with the lock. "Lily, it's me. I'm here." Josephine," Lily breathed, her voice a mere thread. He's here." "Cade." Colt spun, every nerve on high alert. The distinct snick of a hammer being drawn back filled the air. He whirled, drawing his revolver, but too slow. A hot, searing pain ripped through his chest, the force of the impact driving him backward. His vision swam, the world tilting on its axis. Virgil Cade emerged from the shadows, a predatory grin twisting his features. "Well, now," he drawled, his gaze alight with malevolent pleasure. "Fancy seeing you here," Josephine screamed, throwing herself in front of Lily. "Colt! Get her out, Joe!" Colt gasped, his voice a strangled whisper. He fought to remain upright, his hand clamped over the wound. Get Lily to safety. "I won't abandon you," Josephine choked out, her voice trembling. "That's an order," Colt growled, his voice hardening with each word. "Get her out." Josephine hesitated, anguish etched on her face. But logic prevailed. Lily's life had to be paramount. She seized her sister's hand and pulled her towards the exit. "I will return," she promised, her voice thick with emotion. "I swear it." As Josephine guided Lily away, Colt turned to face Cade, his expression a mask of icy fury. "This ends now, Virgil," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "Everything ends, Colt," Cade sneered, "the only wob." "Question is, how?" Cade fired, but this time Colt anticipated the move. He sidestepped the bullet, his movements surprisingly fluid despite his injury. He returned fire, the shot tearing into Cade's shoulder. Cade roared, pain contorting his features, but he pressed onward. He charged, a knife glinting wickedly in his grasp. Colt met him head-on, their bodies colliding with a jarring thud. They wrestled, each fighting for dominance. Colt felt his strength ebbing, the agony in his chest intensifying with each breath. He knew he was running out of time, but he would not yield. He had to ensure Josephine's safety. He had to secure Lily's freedom. He had to expiate his past sins with a pour surge of raw adrenaline. He broke free of Cade's hold. He surged forward, landing a brutal blow to Cade's jaw. Cade staggered back, dazed. Colt seized his opportunity. He wrenched the knife from Cade's grasp and plunged it deep into his chest. Cade gasped, disbelief flooding his eyes. He crumpled to the floor, lifeless. Colt stood over Cade's fallen form, his chest heaving, his vision blurring. He felt a strange sense of finality. as though a burden had been shed. But the relief was fleeting. The pain surged through him, overwhelming him, a torment beyond bearing. He stumbled, collapsing onto the ground. Darkness enveloped him. He heard Josephine's voice, calling out his name. He attempted to respond, but his throat was constricted. He felt her touch upon his face, her tears warm on his skin. "Colt, stay present," she pleaded, her voice laced with desperation. "Do not go." He longed to convey his love, to seek forgiveness for all his misdeeds. But he was too weak. He closed his eyes, succumbing to the encroaching darkness. He felt a profound serenity, a sense of resolution. He had fulfilled his purpose. He had rescued Lily. He had gained Josephine's love. Perhaps, just perhaps, he had finally achieved redemption. Josephine cradled Colt's head, her own tears a torrent. Lily knelt beside her, her face ashen with shock and grief. "His breath is gone," Lily whispered, her voice breaking. "He cannot be gone," Josephine sobbed, her voice cracking with despair. "He simply cannot." She pressed her ear close to his chest, seeking a heartbeat. Silence. She searched for a pulse. Faint, barely perceptible. "He draws breath," she cried, hope flickering. "But it is fleeting." She knew their location was distant from any chance of aid. And even if they managed to reach medical assistance, she knew doubt filled any remaining possibility of him surviving. She fixed her focus on Lily, her expression pleading with her. "We must act," she urged. "We cannot stand idly by." Lily affirmed her commitment and asked, "Is there something we can do?" The memories of her mother flooded her mind, and then what she taught her of folk cure for trauma. It was a long shot, but it was the only chance she could think of. "Yarrow is what we need to seek." Lily moved without hesitation and began to rush out of the room, committed to finding what they needed. Josephine tore a strip off of her dress to put against Colt's wound, whispering, "Please be okay." Both she and Colt had ventured too far to let fate take him now. As she searched for water in yarrow, Josephine ripped a portion of her dress and pressed it into Colt's wound, trying to slow the blood loss. She muttered words of confidence and love. Lily came back with clear water. Josephine rapidly prepared the medicine, grinding the leaves and placing them into the water. The wound was cleaned and the medicine was prepared on top. "We must wait," Josephine whispered. Long hours spent in silence, watching Colt. The sun got higher in the sky, casting long shadows. The day got hotter and hotter. Josephine refused to leave his side. She held Colt's hand and whispered that she loved him. Just when she was about to give up, she felt a hand squeeze. Colt was staring at her. "Joe," he whispered. "Colt," she exclaimed. "You are awake." "Lily?" he asked with a searching tone. "I am here," Lily said on her knees. "You saved me, Colt. I can't thank you enough." Colt produced a faint smile. "Worth it." He closed his eyes from exhaustion. She loved him and will forever love him. A second chance. Josephine pressed down harder, Colt's lifeblood turning her hands slick. The poultice, a mix of gathered herbs and fervent hope, proved woefully inadequate against the gushing wound. Lily, her face a mosaic of tears and dirt, clutched at Josephine's skirt. He won't leave us, will he?" she breathed, her voice a thread against the backdrop of the snapping fire. Josephine's throat constricted, the painful knot mirroring her own terror. "No, Lilybug. He's resilient, a scrapper." The assurance felt flimsy, a paper wall against the tempest within. Her father, The judge swam into her thoughts. A man of inflexible justice, a man who would view Colt Avery as a scoundrel deserving his comeuppance. Yet she glimpsed something more, something profound beneath the layers of pain and hardened resolve, a man capable of profound change, who had wagered his own existence for a girl he barely knew. Agonizing hours stretched into an eternity. Dawn arrived, painting the horizon in shades of rose and apricot, yet gloom still clung to the cabin's interior. Colt's breaths came shallow and uneven. Josephine sought a pulse, finding it barely discernible, a fragile flutter beneath her fingers. "No," she whispered, shaking her head vehemently. "No, not now." She leaned in, her breath warming his ear. "Colt, hold on. We need you." She despised the need, the insidious way he had infiltrated her defenses, making her envision a future she deemed impossible with a man like him. Then, a tremor. His eyelids flickered, a low sound rumbling in his chest. Josephine inhaled sharply, a wave of relief so intense it threatened to unmoor her. "Colt, can you hear me?" His eyes drifted open, unfocused at first, then slowly clearing, recognizing her face. "Joa," he croaked, his voice a parched whisper. "Lily safe?" "She's right here," Josephine reassured, gently enclosing his hand in hers. "She's safe. You saved her." A faint smile graced his lips, a fleeting echo of the man she had grown to cherish. The path to restoration was a protracted ordeal. Colt remained fragile, haunted by phantoms of his past, the visages of those he had wronged branded into his memory. But with each sunrise he rallied, fueled by Josephine's unwavering commitment and Lily's unconditional love. While Colt mended, Josephine dedicated herself to exonerating him. She anticipated her father would present a formidable challenge, that she refused to yield. She had witnessed the truth reflected in Colt's eyes, witnessed his sacrifice, and she would champion his cause, even if it meant fracturing the bedrock of her beliefs. She rode toward her father's residence, the evidence she had painstakingly collected, sworn statements from minors, ledgers exposing Cade's illicit dealings, Lily's account clutched tightly in her grasp. The imposing manor loomed, an emblem of the very legal system she was about to confront. Her father received her in his study, a frown creasing his brow. "Josephine," he began, his tone measured, "I am aware of the events. I trust that affection hasn't distorted your perspective." Josephine met his gaze head-on, her resolve unwavering. "Affection, father, or righteous indignation? I rescued Lily, and I am privy to the full scope of Cade's machinations. And I know the truth about Colt Avery." She presented the evidence on his desk, the room filled with the weight of unspoken accusations. Judge Blake scrutinized the documents, his expression remaining inscrutable. Josephine watched, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She knew her father possessed integrity, but he was also a man constrained by the letter of the law, a law that had condemned a man she now considered innocent. After what felt like an eon, he lifted his head, his eyes reflecting a conflict of sorrow and comprehension. This complicates matters significantly," he conceded, his voice subdued. "However, even granted Avery acted in self-defense, his past transgressions remain." Josephine inhaled deeply. "He spared my sister's life, father. He risked annihilation for her. Doesn't that hold any merit?" A prolonged silence hung between them. Finally, Judge Blake released a weary sigh, the burden of his decision etched onto his face. "I shall review the evidence diligently. I will confer with the relevant authorities. But I offer no guarantees, Josephine. The law remains paramount." Days later, Josephine stood beside Colt in the town square, in a state of anticipation. The atmosphere crackled with tension. The townspeople assembled to witness the verdict of her plea. Judge Blake ascended the platform, his very presence demanding quiet. He spoke of jurisprudence, of fairness, of the moral ambiguities inherent in human affairs. Then he paused, his gaze connecting with Josephine's. In light of the newly admitted evidence, and giving weight to the mitigating circumstances, I hereby grant Colt Avery a complete pardon. A collective murmur swept through the crowd. Colt stared at the judge, stark disbelief etched across his features. He had steeled himself for punishment, retribution, but not this, not absolution. Josephine turned to him, her eyes glistening with joyous tears. "You're free, Colt," she breathed, reaching for his hand. He grasped it, his hold firm, his gaze riveted on hers. "Free because of you," he managed, his voice thick with emotion. He drew her close, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he permitted himself to embrace hope. He had been offered a reprieve, an opportunity to forge a new life, an opportunity to embrace love. They departed the town, leaving behind the specters of Colt's former existence, heading westward toward a future they would sculpt together. They discovered a modest ranch nestled in a serene valley, surrounded by undulating hills and an endless sky. They toiled tirelessly, repairing fences, cultivating crops, constructing a home. Lily flourished in the boundless space, her joyful sounds reverberating through the valley. Colt unearthed a knack for woodworking, crafting furniture and playthings with his hardened hands. Josephine employed her legal acumen to assist those in need, becoming a symbol of justice in the tight-knit community. Life proved challenging. They contended with droughts, tempests, and occasional prejudice from those unable to forget Colt's past. But they confronted it together, their love serving as a constant source of strength and resilience. They cultivated reliance on one another, trust, and forgiveness. Colt's history lingered as an indelible mark, a scar that would never fully vanish. But it no longer defined him. He had evolved from a condemned fugitive into a man worthy of Josephine's affection, a man who had discovered redemption in the most improbable of circumstances. The seasons turned. Their hair acquired a silvery sheen, their faces etched with the chronicles of time and trials. Yet their love endured, a flame that burned ever brighter with each passing year. One twilight, they relaxed on their porch, witnessing the sunset paint the heavens with vivid strokes. Lily, now a vibrant young woman with children of her own, sat beside them, her little ones playing nearby. Colt clasped Josephine's hand, his eyes radiating a love that defied articulation. "Remember that day in the arid expanse?" he reminisced, his voice a low rumble. "I never could have envisioned this. With you, with all of this." Josephine smiled tenderly, her eyes sparkling with unshed tears. "Neither could I," she responded, squeezing his hand. "But sometimes the most precious gifts are discovered in the most unexpected corners." The sun descended below the horizon, casting elongated shadows across the valley floor. But within their hearts, the beacon of their love continued to illuminate, a testament to the transformative power of second chances, the enduring fortitude of the human spirit, and the unwavering belief in the promise, quote, of redemption. Colt gazed at Josephine, the woman who had rescued him, the woman he cherished above all else. He had arrived in the West a marked man, anticipating his demise. Instead, he found a life, a family, and a love that would endure. He had been granted a new lease on life, and he knew, with unwavering certainty, that he would dedicate the remainder of his days to ensuring her happiness, to proving himself worthy of the boundless affection she had bestowed upon him. He leaned in and kissed her, a gentle, affectionate kiss that spoke volumes. The passage of years faded away, and they were momentarily transported back to their youth, brimming with hope and possibility, standing on the threshold of a future brimming with promise. Night deepened, stars blossoming one by one, twinkling like diamonds scattered across a fabric of deepest velvet. Colt and Josephine sat in comfortable companionship, their hands intertwined, observing their grandchildren at play, their hearts overflowing with gratitude for the life they had constructed together. A life forged in adversity, tempered by love, and graced with a second chance.